All right, I think we're up. We're going to double check here before getting started. All right, we're good to go. All right, what's going on, everyone? So we're going to do a live update today talking about a couple items in the Middle East around the ceasefire with Israel. We've got, right out the gate, it's going to start pretty brutal. Unfortunately, we've got some Hamas executions of collaborators in Gaza. We're going to talk about what's next in the ceasefire. It is still holding technically. We're going to shift over to some Israeli operations in the West Bank, some issues up north with Hezbollah. The Houthis, it's some interesting stuff there. They're technically back on the foreign terrorist organization list, and we got our hands on their talking points that they just released yesterday, propaganda talking points from the Houthis that we'll run through. It's kind of an interesting little aspect. But what we're going to do today is a little bit different in the sense that it's going to be a live stream. So we're going to run, the first portion is going to be an update, just like a normal video. The second portion then is going to be a live Q&A. And if you like this, Torsten here on this channel, kind of German, or he does kind of Ukraine updates in German. If you like it, tell Torsten thank you, because he's kind of the one who recommended it. If you don't like it, oh man, lag going on. Laggy camera. All right, let's see. We're going to fix it. Actually, I don't know if we're going to fix it on the spot. All right, we're backing out. We're backing out. We're going to fix the camera. We're going to fix the camera and coming back. I'll let you guys know. I'll publish on X as we get the... Wait, seems good now. I got the message. We good now with the camera? All right. So we're going for it. I guess it works better when it's down here, so we're going for it. Look, if you like the live updates here, head over to Torsten, let him know that it's good. If you don't like the updates, head over to Torsten and tell him it was a stupid idea and he never should have told me to do this. Now, starting out with some kind of upsetting news out of Gaza, really. Yesterday, this was published on the Gaza Now Telegram channel. So we know the ceasefire there went into effect about a week ago. And right out the gate, we saw Hamas kind of flowing into the streets in their uniforms, right? Kind of showing that they still do have quite a bit of sway in Gaza. And yesterday, they actually released this video. I'm not going to play the video. It's like gore and pretty graphic. But the title of it is "The Moment of Punishing the Agents of the Zionist Occupation Who Caused the Killing of Thousands of Our Palestinian People in Gaza." So collaborators, according to Hamas. Now, we see this at the end of any war, any conflict, where collaborators are kind of rounded up and summarily executed, like you're seeing here. So it's not unique to warfare. Unfortunately, it is something that we're seeing play out in Gaza right now. And there were concerns about this happening. Now, it wasn't just this one incident. A little bit later, so that was 12:44 yesterday, local time here. A few hours later, they sent out another note, adding that on top of those 6, another 5 collaborators were then executed. So that's 11 people total announced, and I don't know that celebrated is the right way to put it, but publicly announced, right? Not being hidden through this pro-Palestinian channel, that at least 11 collaborators were executed yesterday in Gaza. Now, a quick note, every one of these segments will have the links in the description below if you want to check those out. I also have a link to a clip channel that I just started. Again, Torsten influence here. The Q&As are going to be clipped out into segments, and those segments of answering each question are going to be put as full videos on the clip channel that's linked below. Now, to give everybody a bit of an idea here as to how the, kind of the area we're looking at, which personally I always find this kind of helpful. So we'll zoom out. We're going to be looking at mostly Israel today, Gaza Strip down here in the southwest portion that we were just discussing. What we're seeing right now, this portion of the ceasefire, is Israeli forces have largely withdrawn to the areas in blue on this map. So you've got the Nezarim corridor here, and then around the outskirts of the Gaza Strip are where Israeli forces are currently located. There have been some reports in recent days of Israeli forces taking action against armed militants in the Gaza Strip. So when someone steps out of a tunnel and moves towards a rocket launcher, or like they see lining up a mortar or something like that, Israel has been conducting those strikes. But by and large, this ceasefire has held. And we are going to come back to this map here shortly. But good news in terms of the ceasefire is we did get some names of the 4 Israeli hostages that are set to be released this weekend. I don't know if it's necessarily tomorrow or Sunday, but my apologies on the names here. We have Karina Arayev, Daniel Gilboa, Nama Levy, and Leary Elbag. These 4 girls here set to come home here in the next 24, 48 hours. I don't know the number of Palestinian prisoners that are going to be exchanged for these 4. The calculations there change quite a bit. So there's a different number of Palestinians that come home based off of which Israelis are released. So men, women, children, or soldiers. And then it's the same thing on the Palestinian side. So there is a different formula for somebody who is in jail for, let's say, throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers. That's a different number of those prisoners get out than, ones who were found guilty or serving a life sentence for actually murdering Israelis. So I don't know quite yet what that percentage looks like. Now, while there is good news that this ceasefire is continuing to hold, what we're seeing elsewhere in the area is that Israel's largely shifting focus to the West Bank. So what they're talking about now is kind of an increase in raids and military operations in Samaria, which Samaria and Judea is another term for the West Bank, Samaria being the northern portion. So the IDF actually put out a statement here. We'll go direct to the IDF, where they said the chief of the general staff and the director of the ISA held a situational assessment in Jenin. For reference, Jenin, looking at the West Bank here. Jenin is in the very northern portion, right here on this map from Live UA. We'll come back to that here in a minute. The director of the ISA said, quote, "We are in a multi-front campaign, but right now it's Samaria's time, and you can't defeat terrorism through defense alone. I think the value of completing the mission has very significant benefits." And one thing that was worth mentioning here, I thought they said something about 7 fronts. Well, here's more from the chief of the general staff. We'll come back to Levy, who actually just within the last week resigned. So that is this gentleman here on the right. He's resigned. He's effective, I believe, at the beginning of March, will step down as the chief of the general staff, which isn't all that shocking, especially following the October 7th attacks. There was a lot of talk about a lot of Israeli officials stepping down and resigning. So you can kind of try to read between the lines here, and maybe it has to do with the wrap-up of certain operations. Maybe you can tie it to a new president in office in the United States. I'm sure all of those things played into it to a degree, but big picture, it's not out of the ordinary that a lot of these senior leaders in Israel were, as soon as the time permitted, kind of prepared to step down. And that's generally what this looks like right now. So turning to his statements, again, he's going to be in this position for another 5 weeks, we'll say. He says, "We have identified a hub of terrorism in northern Samaria for quite some time. I think, Avi, there have been dozens of operations in northern Samaria over the last year. These operations have been quite effective. And I believe that once we recognized that the Jenin camp had become a hub for these planning terrorist attacks or looking for a safe haven after committing terror attacks, it was absolutely the right decision to go forcefully against it. This is a good start with our best foot forward." And this one is actually from a couple days ago. Just earlier today, we got this update from the IDF saying that they carried out an operation, again in Samaria, so the northern portion of the West Bank, where an airstrike, it must have been more than just what we're seeing here, killed 10 militants, and they were able to capture 20 more. So we are seeing a pretty noticeable uptick in violence in the West Bank. It's never been entirely peaceful. It's, when you compare what's going on in the West Bank to the other fronts that Israel has been fighting, it's apples and oranges. So there is an argument to be made here that Israel has to figure out what's going on in the West Bank to get a handle on the security situation there. But in terms of the level of violence, the casualties coming out of that, it pales in comparison to Gaza when the war was kind of on full blast there, pales in comparison to the threat that Hezbollah posed in the fighting up north, and of course Iran, the Shiite militias, even the Houthis to a degree. So there's an argument to be made here that as some of these other fronts kind of start to die down, and if we step back, you probably heard Israel refer to 7 fronts that they're fighting at different times. And let's see if I can get these right. I might misplace a few of these, but you've got Hamas in Gaza. You've got the West Bank, which includes groups like Hamas. Hamas has recently talked about their forces in the West Bank and celebrated their martyrs that have died there. You got Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others in the West Bank. You've got Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. You've got the Houthis in Yemen. You've got Iran, the IRGC. You've got Assad, and then you've got the Shiite militias across Iraq and Syria. So if you look at that setup across the 7 fronts, essentially, that Israel's fighting, Hamas is pretty well beat back right now. Still a force to be reckoned with, of course, but there's a little, some Israeli forces are starting to pull out of the Gaza Strip. You've got Syria. That's a different story right now, right? Hezbollah is technically in a ceasefire right now. More on that in a second. The Shiite militias that are fighting across Syria and Iraq are in a different place today than they were just a few months ago with the fall of Hezbollah and the Hezbollah ceasefire and the fall of Assad. So you can see how it's kind of a reduction in the fronts that Israel has to focus on, which could be an argument as to why they're making the move into the West Bank right now. BZ, appreciate the note there, man. That and the support, that means a lot. Now, Al Jazeera actually hit on this as well. Wanted to get their perspective here, which is a bit challenging right now. Their article here says Israeli forces block entrances to Jenin as deadly raid enters 4th day. And some of the key points here that they highlighted that I wanted to call out was they said that part of the goal here was just, let's see, people there say Israeli forces want to raze these Palestinian towns to the ground just like they did in Gaza. Now, one of the challenges here coming from reporting inside of the West Bank is that the reporters are actually coming from Jordan. Let's see if I can find that exact quote here. Yeah, here we go. Reporting from Jordan because Al Jazeera has been banned by the Palestinian Authority from reporting the occupied West Bank. So Al Jazeera's sources are still there. Remember, journalists are going to have sources on the ground, whether they're physically there or not. But Al Jazeera right now has been banned from reporting in the West Bank. So they're continuing to report on the event, but I don't know just how exact their information is going to be as compared to when they actually had offices operating there. But nonetheless, talking about large-scale raids, dozens killed and wounded at this point. And again, that leader there talking about, or that interviewer there, talking about shutting down 4 entrances to Jenin. So again, this northern portion of the West Bank, you can see kind of how that could be. Did we lose the map there? There we go. How 4, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. I haven't seen an Israeli map come out talking about this, but you can see how the city and the refugee camp down here in the southwest portion could be sectioned off relatively easily. Now, before shifting up here to talking about the ceasefire in Lebanon, a quick note to everybody who's hanging around still or just stepping into the live for the first time. What we're doing here is running through a general news update like we would in any video, and then the back half of this is going to be a Q&A. So if you got questions, appreciate that. Hold on. We will get to those at the back end. So roughly 60 days ago now, Israel and Hezbollah entered into a ceasefire agreement in southern Lebanon. That is set to hit the 60-day mark here shortly. And at that point, Israel was supposed to withdraw all of their forces from southern Lebanon. It doesn't look like that's going to play out. But it's kind of tricky. This is one of those where both sides have differing stories. Hezbollah even has their own story here for as much as you want to put value on that. But it's not entirely clear, to me at least, that both sides want this to continue on, if that makes sense. This doesn't mean that there's going to be a quick jump back into large-scale fighting in southern Lebanon, but I don't think it's out of the question that we could see a kind of low-intensity Israeli occupation there for a while to come. Now, more details on this, and then I'll get into that. That's a personal assessment. So it says, under the terms of a truce between Israel and Hezbollah in late November, Israeli troops were supposed to withdraw within 60 days from areas of Lebanon that had recently wrested from the group's control, from Hezbollah's control. Hezbollah was also required to withdraw from the region, allowing the Lebanese military to assert control over an area where Hezbollah, an Iran-backed Shiite fort and political force, had long dominated. And just before this went into effect, the Netanyahu government put out a note saying, since the ceasefire agreement has not yet been fully enforced by Lebanon, the gradual withdrawal process will continue under full cooperation with the United States. So essentially what we ended up with here, and you have the Lebanese government saying, we can't go in and fill these gaps. Pull up a map here. This might actually be helpful. Back to live viewing map here. So here you have Lebanon up north. Israel down south. This is the contested area here. And what they're saying is the Israeli forces are in this blue area here, and the Lebanese government is supposed to come in and take over that area to make sure that Hezbollah can't come in and set up their tunnel networks and firing points and all the stuff that they've had there for quite a while. So Israel is saying, we can't leave because the Lebanese army hasn't shown up to take over these positions. And if we leave, Hezbollah could just come right back in. And the Lebanese army is saying, we can't go in there because the Israeli military is still there. And once they leave, we'll come and backfill their positions. So, it seems like that's something that could be pretty easily navigated, right? You just have somebody coordinate between the two sides and like do a bit of a handover, right? Like maybe a 50-50 swap, have a couple soldiers from Lebanon come in and start to work with the Israeli military, and you can kind of see it transitioning over time. Doesn't seem like a bridge too far to get that taken care of. But this takes it back to what I was saying just a second ago of, I don't know that Israel or Lebanon are really incentivized to complete that, if you will. Now, Hezbollah doesn't want either one of these groups there at baseline. But if you look at it from Israel's perspective, it's understandable. Like, the Lebanese army has not gained some massive ability in the last few weeks that they didn't have before, right? It's not like they stood up brand new brigades and were outfitted with new equipment that now they can take the fight to Hezbollah finally and actually prevent them from setting up shop in southern Lebanon. It's the same army that ceded all of that territory in the first place. UNIFIL is still there to the degree. Same thing with UNIFIL. Like, they're not in any different position today than they were 60 days ago. So from Israel's perspective, they're probably looking at this like the only people who are going to be able to keep us safe are us. I understand that. From the Lebanese perspective, they're probably looking at this saying, like, do we really want to get back into it with Hezbollah? They were pushed out of there in the first place, right? And the Lebanese army against Hezbollah at full strength didn't really stand much of a chance. So I don't think it's out of the question that you have the Lebanese army not really wanting to go in to the south and risk running up against Hezbollah. And you probably also have the Israelis saying, we're going to do this better, and then we can actually guarantee our own safety. So, long way around to say the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel is kind of on edge right now, but I wouldn't take that to mean that there's going to be a large-scale war opening up there anytime soon. It just might mean more of a longer-term occupation of sorts in southern portions of Lebanon by the Israeli military. But that's going to be something to keep an eye on here. So shifting over to the Houthis, audio break every time you turn your head. I'm learning here. I appreciate it, guys. Appreciate the feedback. Thought about doing a test run here with somebody else, but I wanted to get this information out, so I just went for it. But good to know about the audio. So Trump just redesignated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, FTO. And this one could be a little confusing because we've kind of heard that before. Also, they were there before. So the executive order, one of the 17 million that Trump put out just a couple days ago, and it's impossible to keep up with these, the executive order sets in motion a process by which Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, will be designated as a foreign terrorist organization. They say within 1 month of taking office, the Biden administration reversed the Houthis' designation, so on and so forth. The Trump administration is going to crack down on them, essentially, is what all this says. The reason I think there's a little bit of confusion here is that they were designated a foreign terrorist organization at one point. The Biden administration took them off of that list before the October 7th attacks with the idea of maybe this could be some sort of incentive to get the Houthis to get along better with everyone. And we hear that a lot with a lot of different, when it comes to any sort of sanctions around the world. And this is a way to look at the FTO designation is as a sanction of sorts, right? It's slapping this on the group. So the idea is maybe you take it off and maybe they start acting a little better and they don't do their terroristy stuff. Realistically, they kind of fell out of the conversation for a long time. Nobody in the United States was really paying any attention to the Houthis at all. And then, October 7th happened. They started slinging missiles and drones at everything that passed through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And now they're back on the foreign terror organization list. Another piece of the confusion here was that Biden kind of did something like this just before he left office. He added them to the list for the specially designated terror groups, SDTG. So these are different things. And I don't know. I wish they weren't because it just makes it confusing, but they are. And it's two different terms that can apply to the same group, but also have a little bit different meaning. So FDD, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, put together what I think is the best kind of breakdown of the difference between these two. Again, all this stuff linked in the description if you want to check it out. So by and large, the big takeaway here is an FTO is a step above an SDGT. Feels funny saying all these acronyms. It's a step above in the sense that there's more tools the United States has at their disposal to go after the organization and their supporters. So right out the gate, one option for an FTO versus an SDGT is that you can sue, victims can sue the organization. I don't know how much that's going to accomplish one way or the other, but it's here. Foreign terror organization, that bans U.S. visa issuance and admission into the United States. If I'm being honest, I'm kind of surprised that's a no for this one. It seems like if you're going to label a group, especially designated global terrorist, we probably, I don't know, probably don't want them in the country, right? Seems like that's an oversight. But a bigger one here, really, from my perspective, is this piece here around the legal threshold for criminal prosecution. So really what this does is it makes it easier for the United States government as a whole to go after people that are providing support to the designated terrorist organization. It lowers the threshold for who the government can go after for providing material or financial support for the Houthis, which should be a good thing, right? I mean, at this point, the Houthis have caused a lot of problems in global shipping, really. So this opens up the toolbox, more things that we can do to try to bring back kind of the status quo to that area of the world. Now, the Houthis, for their part, have said, hey, ceasefire. Remember, the only reason we're doing any of this stuff is because of the war in Gaza. So with the ceasefire in effect, we'll start releasing people. And just a couple days ago, they released the 25 crew members from the Galaxy Leader. Do you remember that? It was a while ago, right? That was the crazy music video they filmed, storming a boat, actually took the whole thing over. So 25 crew members from all around the world, really. We got Philippines, Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, and Mexico. I'm going to be very interested to hear like what they have to say when they actually get interviewed. Like, this was a group that I never heard anything positive or negative about their conditions when they were being held. So I have no idea. Like, it'll be really interesting to hear these guys actually talk to reporters and talk about what the last, they were taken in November of 23. So what do we got? 14 months in Houthi captivity. It'll be kind of interesting to see, like, what was your experience like living with the Houthis for over a year. But we're not going to stop there because the Houthis did do something good. That's a step in the right direction. They said this was in light of the ceasefire agreement. So they wanted to kind of, it's a token of peace, a token of goodwill is kind of what they said. But then they turned right back around and did us dirty. So actually, I did see some people say they liked this interpretation of the Statue of Liberty. It is kind of mean looking. I don't know. Intimidating, if you will. So this was just yesterday. I think we might actually be catching this just at the right time. So they posted this yesterday saying America is a mother of terrorism and join our tweet campaign to tell the world how the United States is a bastion of terrorism. And that's where we're going now. Oh, it starts in a day? Are you kidding me? I thought we had timed this thing just right. I think they reset that clock. Maybe it didn't get the reaction they were hoping for, so they're trying to do it again. So anyways, this is the page the Houthis put out with all of these talking points of like, here's how you can tell people how America is bad and the mother of terrorism. And you got to be careful here because a couple of these stood out for me. I like this one. In 1756, U.S. governments offered 150 gold pieces for every Native American scalp. So we're going back to 20 years before the United States was officially founded. 20 by, I like that. Now, the risky part here, because I was playing around with this earlier, is when you click on one of these, it automatically takes you over to X and Twitter, and it's like, hey, just hit post. So gotta be careful there, on the verge of just slinging Houthi propaganda accidentally. But we got a wide range here. The U.S. used its veto to defend Gaza genocide, casting 50 vetoes to back Israeli occupation. The UN accused the U.S. of indiscriminate attacks in Syria, potentially war crimes. That's pretty vague. Abu Ghraib, got to have that in here. It's just interesting to see, like, Washington declares Israel's security its own. So you can kind of see, I'm interested in how this pans out across the internet today and tomorrow. Like, are people actually going to grab these and start throwing them out there? This is the one link I feel like all of the links in this video are going to be below. I don't feel like I can, in good faith, send out this one because I feel like that would just be perpetuating Houthi propaganda. So we're not going to link this one, but I do have their Telegram channel linked if you want to check it out from that perspective. But with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Appreciate everybody stopping by. We're going to dive into the Q&A section now. Again, these Q&As will be, I'm going to move this off the screen so we're not just staring at like all the hatred of America as we dive into this. But yeah, throw those questions out there. And for anybody interested, what we're going to be doing is all of the, be careful clicking on those links. I know, man. Yeah. Rolling the dice a little bit. So what we'll do is this whole video will go up entirely. And then the questions that we'll dive into right now is those will be broken out onto the Clips channel. That'll be linked in the description below. I think there might have been one back here we'll go to. Let's see. A hard time keeping up with the chat. You guys are awesome. Oh, also, the reason I wanted to do kind of a Q&A as well and put those up as separate videos is when I see like the comments on videos, I do get in there from time to time. Sometimes it breaks my soul on the internet, but there's a lot of like really well thought out and well articulated thoughts. So I feel like you all are a great audience to throw some questions out to and see like, how do you interpret A, B, C, and D? And I think it's probably questions that a lot of people would be thinking about. Let's see. We'll jump over here. I clicked a Houthi link and they stole my Trump coin. I got it, man. Ty, Clips channel is new as of like 40 minutes ago or something, man. So it hasn't existed before. So just standing it up for this exclusive purpose. I need some moderators. If anybody's interested in being a moderator, shoot me an email. Preston at warstories.com. .co, not com. Co. Escape 692. I actually don't drink anymore, man. I used to in the Army, just a beer guy, and then bourbon for a while, but probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, just stopped, wasn't enjoying it. It was kind of bringing me down a lot, and honestly was probably drinking way too much, especially in the Army. So just felt like the right move to stop that entirely. So we're laying off that for now. Next Unclassified podcast came out today. So Ben and I got on. Ben Wheeler, good dude. We're working on a trip right now to this general portion of the world. Might do a live episode from somewhere over there in a couple weeks here. I think it'll be in February. But just talked about it. Ben does a really good job of diving into a lot more domestic politics. So what we try to do is I talk a little bit about Middle East. Ben gets into, and then I talk Ukraine. Ben gets into things more in Asia and then a lot of the domestic side. So he's been great to lean on for like a lot of the cabinet picks because I'm following along as best I can, but he's got a good understanding of like the ins and outs of domestic politics. And it helps me kind of understand what it is we're getting at. Sheba Cat, you're awesome, man. Much appreciated. Spike, do you think Israel will leave Syria this year? That's going to be tricky. I think that's going to depend on what Jolani does in terms of the progress that they do or they do not make in Syria. So we'll pull up. See, we got the map up here, man. It's perfect. So this area here, I think this is actually updated. So this blue area here, to the right of this blue line, is the area that Israel pushed into essentially like as the Assad regime fell. Like they were ready to go. They got in there pretty quickly. And they're still today, or within the last couple days, they've put out some videos and pictures showing different weapon systems that they've captured and fighting positions they've taken over in those portions of Syria. It doesn't look like they're advancing anymore for what it's worth. I know that at one point there was, I think it was just like, I don't want to say not exaggeration, but like speculative fear mongering in a sense of like, there were some Russian channels pushing it actually, saying, look at this, Israel is on the march to Damascus. And I think that was never really in the cards. But it does look like they've stopped across the board, set up some security positions there. But I think so long as they continue to find weapons and don't have a clear sign of like what Jolani is going to do, they're probably not going to leave. That could end up being a year or more. Syria's in a tricky spot right now, right? They've got essentially a jihadi, a reformed jihadi, however you want to look at it that way. But they're also not they're not going down the route right now of Islamic State or Al-Qaeda. So it is a more moderate state, albeit with a checkered past. So from Israel's perspective, from anyone's perspective, we're also seeing a similar issue up here in the north with Turkey's got a pretty close eye on their border. You've got to be concerned about is Jolani and HTS and now the interim government, are they actually going to be able to tamp down on groups like Islamic State and hold any sort of real control? So honestly, my gut would say that we're going to see Israeli forces in this area for quite a while. It might be a year or more before Syria is set up well enough to kind of show the world that they actually have the state under control. That's where I would lean. Joe Linton. Yeah, man. Do a stream with Jake. I haven't in the past, but he's a huge channel, man. The guy does an awesome job. All right. Making a channel on Pepperbox like Task and Purpose. What are your thoughts on how the Trump administration might handle the Ukraine war? So Pepperbox is an invite. I had any conversations with those guys about doing that. I'm torn with this. Got ambulances going by. Or as my daughter says, ambulance. I'm a little bit torn on anything in this space being boxed off or behind a paywall, because I think maybe for certain projects, but even then, like if I were to go on and we're working on some of this now, but some on the ground trip somewhere reporting from certain areas of the world, I'd feel better about maybe putting that behind a paywall. But even then, like, I want that information to be out there in the world. So I don't know. It's one of the reasons you don't see like a Patreon or exclusive only thing here, is I'm not exactly sure what would justify putting something behind a paywall. So it's something I struggle with, honestly. But you asked about Trump administration, how they can handle the war in Ukraine. So this is an interesting one because nobody knows. And the Russians are freaking out a little bit right now, which is interesting. We saw before Trump came into office, when it was still unknown, like campaigns were going on. Was it going to be Harris? Was it going to be Trump? We saw a fair amount of push from Russia arguing that each of them would be good and bad. So some of them looked at the Harris and said that's going to be the same as Trump, or is the same as Biden. So they knew what to expect. Oh, sorry. Random pop up there. So they looked at Harris and said that's going to be the same as Biden, so we know what to expect. And some of them said good, because it's not making much of a dent in the Russian military. Others looked at it and said not good, because it's going to be a continuation of aid and possibly even an invite to NATO down the line. Others then looked at Trump and said good, he's actually talked about cutting off aid to Ukraine. Bad, we have no idea which direction this guy's going to take it. And that's kind of what we're seeing play out right now. So there's been some kind of prominent Russian commentators in the last few days all over the map. Like, I would say they are less optimistic than they were. Trump coming out threatening Putin a couple days ago, saying we can do this the hard way or the easy way. I do think we're probably going to see some direct communication there between Trump and Putin in the near term. I think Trump at this point recognizes that his promise to end the war before he ever came into office was not realistic, and anybody following the war knew that. Ending it within 24 hours, also not realistic. Now we're hearing from Kellogg, his envoy to this conflict, talking about 100 days, and that feels more attainable to actually make some sort of step in that direction. But I think what we have yet to see right now is how will Trump respond if Putin pushes back? So Trump, in a sense, just threatened Putin. Easy way or hard way. What does that look like if Putin just ignores him or pushes back and says, I'm the one in charge right now, I'm calling the shots? Because we haven't really seen Trump have to navigate that very much, and we all know he would hate that. So that's number one. And then the second one is how Ukraine responds to this as well. We've already seen some changes. Ukraine has started to talk about not mobilizing, but increase recruitment down to the age of 18. So really kind of like targeted their messaging towards younger soldiers to try to boost up the numbers in their ranks. That came right after like Mike Waltz, the new national security advisor, came out talking about something like that. So long as Ukraine can offer Trump positive things, and if Putin kind of pushes back on Trump like he has against everybody so far, I think you could see a relatively aggressive approach by Trump. That said, I think it's still a complete coin toss at this point, man. I think it is to everybody involved. I don't think they have any idea about what's going to come next, for better or for worse. And I feel like you could interpret that a couple different ways. I got to open up the chat window here so I can actually read these. Soldier of God, Syria is a power vacuum right now, especially with the SDF. Do you think SDF will retain power after Syria's interim government? This is one where you could actually see some conversation between Jolani and Trump, which I don't think is off the table. Jolani's done a pretty good job. So he's the new leader in Syria, and he's done a pretty good job of kind of remaking his image. You're seeing diplomats show up in Syria that would never be caught dead with anybody affiliated with, even in the past, Islamic State or Al-Qaeda. All of a sudden, Jolani takes over Syria, and we've got senior diplomats showing up to talk to him. That's different, and I think it kind of opens up some new possibilities. I think there's a situation there where, again, Trump's the guy that makes deals, right? He wants to make something out of nothing or find a way for it to benefit the United States. There are scenarios in Syria and the broader Middle East where deals could be made to benefit us in some way, shape, or form. I wouldn't write that off. So I don't know if it probably has to do with working alongside the SDF, especially in, you know what, let's pull up the map here. This will actually be helpful. Oh, never mind. This one's not. Here we go. See if we can get the map of control in Syria, because it's a nightmare, but it's gotten a little bit better recently. Okay, yeah, this is helpful. So when you say when he says SDF, you're generally talking about this yellow area here, for the most part, and then the rest here is mostly, I think there's some SNA up here, but mostly this is SDF. The yellow. You're seeing the breakout between Jolani in Damascus and then the SDF, which is U.S. backed. So this is the group we tied in with to fight Islamic State. I haven't seen any indications that we're going to step away from that relationship or back it up any more than we already are. So, you know, it's hard to say, I think, at this point, if SDF is going to fall off or play a major role going forward. But as of now, it does seem like they've generally gotten along all right. But I do think we're still in the early phases of Jolani and the new government in Syria figuring out how do they actually govern this country. Again, remember, for anybody following this conflict, HTS was in charge of a portion, I went too fast, a portion of Idlib over here. So they went from being in charge of a portion, but also kind of regularly dodging Russian and Syrian attacks and artillery strikes and bombs, to taking over to running the entire country. Right? So they didn't have to really deal with border issues or trade or any sizable economy or immigration. One of the things in Syria right now is the number of people coming back into the country is staggering, which is like great, wonderful across the board, right? Love that people are able to go back to their homes after they've been displaced for God knows how long. We've then got how many countries in Europe that faced, you know, a lot of pushback against immigration due to, it kind of kicked off with the flow of Syrian immigrants. So it's across the board great that people are coming back to Syria. And the group having to process those now is HTS, an organization that has never had to deal with anything like that in the past. So all of that to say, I think right now they're probably going to leave the SDF alone. It's just not worth dealing with. SDF generally has things clamped down up here when it comes to especially battling Islamic State. It's probably, you know, something they'll come to once they get a couple other issues in Syria sorted out. But pretty messy across the board. Better messy now than it used to, but still pretty complicated. Steve, do you think Trump will discourage Turkey from making a move into Syria? The Middle East with Trump is interesting because I generally don't think he cares all that much. I just think his interest is elsewhere. So I don't know that we're going to see him get too heavily involved in the Middle East. And I think we're seeing that already a little bit with the war in Israel, where immediately the IDF turned and went into the West Bank, and we really haven't seen anybody in the U.S. government talk about that, like, at all. We're on the verge of the ceasefire running out with Lebanon, and nobody's really talking about that. We did see the FTO designation against the Houthis. That's something, but also from Trump's perspective, kind of a layup, right? There are a lot of questions as to why more steps weren't taken against the Houthis under the Biden administration. So, how he handles Erdogan and Turkey, and if Turkey pushes further into Syria, we'll see. I honestly just don't think that's like a top 10 priority for Trump, which could end up being a good thing for Turkey. Maybe through the SNA, they try to establish more control over the northern portion of the country. We'll see. For me, it seems like Trump's priorities right now are first and foremost in the United States. Second is probably China. And then third, honestly, North, South America, Canada, Mexico. I don't think he's going to put a lot of energy in the Middle East is what my gut says right now. Sarpa, U.S. southern border. So how's the situation on the U.S. southern border going to play out? Have you looked into it? What's the possibility of forces going into Mexico? Not something I'm tracking too awful closely right now. The big one is that we, the U.S. government, are set to label cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. I think that's a step in the right direction in the sense that it will give, again, just like the Houthis, it gives the U.S. government more tools to deal with that threat. It doesn't automatically mean military intervention. So there's a lot of terrorist organizations around the world that we do not use lethal force against on a regular basis, but individuals, organizations are sanctioned. There's, economic penalties, all sorts of things like that. So it does open up a lot more legal, financial, a lot of different tools that we could use to go after the cartels than we could previously. So I think that's a step in the right direction. In terms of the troops heading down to the border, I've seen a bunch of different numbers at this point. I think 10,000 is generally the one people are kind of landing on. That would be enough to, if Trump wanted to kind of lock down the border, I think that'd be a number to get closer to that. Remember, the U.S.-Mexico border is about 2,000 miles. That's massive. It's a huge area to lock down. And there are certain areas where there's going to be more people moving through than others, of course. That is kind of no man's land in a sense. But 10,000 troops going down there could really help backstop certain areas to kind of free up Border Patrol agents to head out to other areas and maybe work some of the more congested locations. So it's hard to say which direction that's going. I have seen some people say, well, they're outfitted with their, all their combat gear and they have their equipment and air support. Well, like if you're going to send a battalion or whatever size elements they're sending there, of course, 10,000 is not a battalion. That's quite a bit bigger. But whatever the formations are they're sending, all of those platforms can be used in a non-lethal manner, right? So there's a lot of surveillance equipment that might be utilized alongside a weapon system that you can use without actually firing a Hellfire missile. So there are some values in putting those things on the border if you're trying to watch over a certain area. I would hesitate jumping directly into any sort of kinetic action in Mexico or in the United States against people trying to cross over. That said, it's really hard to dial in where this is going because we don't know what the goal is for the Trump administration. We know they want to secure the border. Anything beyond that in terms of like going into Mexico with military force, I think has to be looked at right now as speculation. I don't think we have a lot of evidence or directives right now that could be in the cards. And honestly, 10,000, look, the incursion into Kursk was like 40 or 50,000 from the Ukrainian military. Apples to oranges, I got it, but 10,000 is not very many soldiers, especially for a 2,000-mile border. I mean, that might be able to push across certain areas, but for what end? Like, what good does it do to put American soldiers 2 kilometers into Mexico? I don't know what that solves necessarily, but I think it's going to be worth paying attention to. For no other reason, it's going to be diverting U.S. military resources. Now, whether you think the mission at the border is a good thing or a bad thing, again, either way, it is going to be diverting military resources there that could potentially be used elsewhere. So for no other reason than that, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on. Getting caught up here. Getting caught up. Oh, no. Playing around with OBS, and I'm not an OBS pro. And now it looks like the chat froze, which that's not a good thing. What good are you, chat, if you're going to freeze? Not you all, but the actual OBS chat froze. Let me pull it up on YouTube real quick. YouTube real quick. There we go. Oh, there we go. Chat is pure cancer. Yeah, we got to figure something out with the chat, man. I don't know how else to say that. I need some moderators. Again, Preston at warstories.co. If anybody is interested in doing some moderation, I could use it. All right, on that note. Oh, we'll hit this last one, and we'll wrap it up. So, do you think the fall of al-Assad will hurt Iran's capabilities? 100%, and I think we're already seeing that play out. So, we'll go to the map here again because I like maps. So, if we look at Iran here, kind of their focus over the last few decades, really, especially since the U.S. went into Iraq in 2003. So, a major focus of Iran was setting up this land bridge that they could use to exert control from Iran, from Tehran especially, across Iraq, across Syria, into Lebanon, and then potentially even a little bit into Jordan, and then, of course, Gaza and the West Bank. So what has happened to Iran just in the last few months, which is crazy when you think about this? They lost a lot of their fighters and a lot of their main connections in Gaza and in the West Bank, and Hezbollah. Remember all the major fighters that were killed there. Syria is now off limits, in a sense, to the IRGC. We've seen Jolani come out and kind of say, like, we still want to be on good terms, but that land bridge is completely severed. So Iran now, if they want to supply anybody over here in Israel or in Lebanon with weapons or intelligence or whatever it might be, they can't fly into Beirut. They can't go across land through Syria. It's a real hit to the IRGC. Another big piece here was when the Assad regime started to fall. First off, it was like, wow, they were on thin ice for a long time, clearly, because it happened so fast. But also we saw a lot of these militia groups, they didn't stand and fight. If you look back to the, whatever, like 7 hours it took for Assad to fall, it was all against regime forces. The militia groups, the Iranian-backed militia groups, a lot of them fled into Iraq. And we saw videos of this. And then there was some talk about them maybe going back in, but they didn't, at least in any large numbers. And the head of the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq even said, like, he's not going to give the order to deploy troops into Syria to try to prop up Assad as the fighting was happening in and around Damascus. So I think that's a major knock to Iran. There was a good article I saw in the Long War Journal where somebody argued that this might be the weakest that we have seen the Iranian regime since 1979. That's a big statement, but there's no doubt the Iranian influence is still there, but severely degraded from where they were, honestly, even like 6 months ago. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty big hit. But with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Again, appreciate everybody stopping by. If you want to be a moderator, let me know. Chat moderator. We'll try to do this about the same time each week. I could use it because I hate that the chat gets toxic and nasty and there's shit going back and forth. That's not good for anybody. That doesn't help anybody. So could use some mods. Throw them out my way. Preston at warstories.co, and we'll get some of those lined up. But hey, thanks everybody for stopping by. Again, the Clips channel will be linked in the description below. I'll cut out some of the Q&As, put them over there over the next couple days. Appreciate your support. Thanks for all you guys do. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.